And when your worldview is built on lies, the only way you can win is to silence those speaking the truth. And so that's why the left wants these laws. So why aren't they afraid of these laws being used against them? Well, here's the better question. When was the last time you heard a mainstream conservative advocate for hate speech laws? So something I've been wanting to talk about for a while is hate speech, right? Because anytime you're talking about hate speech, there should always be a question to the person, say, advocating for hate speech laws, which is, what happens if someone who doesn't agree with you ends up using hate speech laws against you, right? Because theoretically, if we're advocating for hate speech laws, we're saying there are certain things you shouldn't be allowed to say. Well, whether you're a speaker going to a college campus, and let's be honest, when we're having these conversations, it's people on the politically left advocating for hate speech laws because they want to get people like Ben Shapiro or Michael Knowles or Andrew Klavan. I just named all the Daily Wire guys except Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh too, let's throw you in. Banned from speaking on college campuses, right, because they don't agree with their opinions. And so if that's what we're talking about, the question to the person should always be, well, what happens if someone doesn't like what you have to say? Right? What if somebody on the politically right gets in power and now they can use those laws against you? So Andrew Klavan, I think, inadvertently answered this question on his show. But before I get to him, I want to start by laying some of the groundwork here, especially as to why I'm making this video. So 2 reasons. The first of which is there's a ton of videos out there on this. I would suggest that you check the description. I'm going to put primarily videos from Steven Crowder, but then also from Peterson and Dave Rubin and others on this topic. So I highly suggest you check all those out. But the second reason I was primarily motivated to make this video because I actually had a left-wing journalist come to my college campus and speak, and during his speech he advocated for hate speech laws, a journalist of all people. But before I get into why the left wants hate speech laws, let's talk about real quick whether or not there even is such a thing as hate speech. Now, if you've already seen Steven Crowder's videos on the matter, check the description below. You already know that there isn't, right? But in case you haven't, or you simply don't agree with me, maybe you think there is such a thing as hate speech, give me a chance to elaborate real quick. Now, let's start with this. I'm going to give you 2 statements, right? One is from Steven Crowder, and the other is from Jordan Peterson. Both of these are roughly paraphrased, by the way. Crowder says, and he says this in his Change My Mind videos, which is, of course people can say hateful things. Of course people can say terrible things. Of course people can say racist things. But there is no such thing as hate speech in a legal sense, right? And that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about hate speech. We're talking about a legally defined category that is to be delineated from free speech. Now, on the other hand, Jordan Peterson has claimed, again paraphrasing, he'll say, of course there's such a thing as hate speech. You'd have to be naive to think there is no such thing as hate speech. But I'm no fan of hate speech laws because the question is, who defines hate? And the answer is the people who you would least want to define it, because anyone with any sense would have nothing to do with it, which would leave all the people who are greedy for political power to define it. And so on the surface, right, it could seem like the two disagree. On the one hand, you have Crowder saying no such thing as hate speech. On the other hand, you have Peterson saying, well, of course there's such a thing as hate speech. But when you understand what they're actually saying, I think it's pretty clear that they agree. In fact, Peterson, he's already cleared this up in the video that I'll have in the description that he did with Dave Rubin when they announced their departure from Patreon, where he said, if we're talking about a legal category, hate speech doesn't even exist, at least not in that sense. Okay, so let's be clear. When we say there is no such thing as hate speech, we're not saying that people can't say hateful and sometimes even downright evil things. We're not even saying that there aren't appropriate social taboos against saying certain terrible things. There are social taboos against saying racist things, and I think that's perfectly appropriate. But what we are saying is that there is no legal category known as hate speech, nor should there be, right? Because the second you give the government the power to define what constitutes as hate speech, you see gross violations of human rights in countries all around the world that don't have freedom of speech. Because And a lot of people don't know this, surprisingly. Outside of the United States, freedom of speech does not exist. It is not a granted constitutional right. I shouldn't say granted. It's not a recognized human right anywhere outside the United States. And just one of many examples is Mike Ward, he's a Canadian. He's a comedian in Canada, and he was fined $42,000 for an offensive joke, right? And that's just one of many examples. These things happen all the time. Now, the second you say that hate speech isn't real, right? Someone always comes back with, well, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. But is that true? Can you yell fire in a crowded theater? Well, the answer is, it depends, right? Crowder points out that you actually can yell fire in a crowded theater if there's a fire. Right? Because then you're appropriately warning people and perhaps saving them from danger. What you can't do is you can't lie and cause an unnecessary panic that will likely result in people being injured. Right? So the legal restrictions on that kind of speech have nothing to do with the speech, but with the active call to action, which is the extremely important distinction that needs to be made. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he was saying, of course there's such a thing as hate speech. And I was asking him, well, what's the exact definition? And he was kind of giving me these broad lines. And I was saying, yeah, but people would disagree with you on that, right? And then there's more radical people on the left who would say, well, what Ben Shapiro is saying is hate speech. And he was asking me, he was saying, okay, where do you draw the line on hate speech? And I told him where the law draws the line. I said, legally, this is the line. I said, if you're having a conversation with your friend, and you say to your friend about me, oh, I really hate that Stallman character. I think the world would just be a better place if he was dead. Legally, you may not like it. You may say that's horrible, that's evil, but legally that's protected speech. What you can't do, you can't tell your friend, hey, go kill Stallman. Go run him over with your car. Or hey, here's $500. I'll pay you to go run him over with your car. Legally, that's not protective, right? Because that's not speech anymore at that point. That's an active call to action. And he said, yeah, but my saying terrible things about you, say in a private conversation, that's one context. But if I'm saying the same things, but in a different context, like I draw a mob with torches to your house chanting terrible things, that's a different context, and that shouldn't be protected. Now, unfortunately, our conversation ended there, right? Because he had a friend who came and they both had to go to class. But I texted him and I said, well, that example proves my point. If you bring a mob to my house with torches, at that point the speech is irrelevant, right? The illegality of that has nothing to do with the speech, but with his action. You're posing a physical threat to me and my family if you bring a mob with torches to my house. Right, so it doesn't matter what you're saying. What matters is that you're physically threatening me and anybody else in the house. Right, so when we talk about a call to action or an incitement to violence, we're talking about a very specifically defined category to which we could line up a variety of statements and go through one by one and say whether or not the specific phrase qualifies or not. But we don't have any such thing with so-called hate speech. Right, so imagine for a moment that we line up a bunch of different phrases, right? Some are racial slurs, some are just randomly sampled statements from everyday conversations between people, all the way to, say, phrases taken from a Ben Shapiro speech. Now, here's the question. Are there any criteria that we could use to evaluate these phrases and say which ones are hate speech and which ones aren't? Well, of course not. Right? There are some people who would claim that Ben Shapiro is constantly engaging in hate speech, which causes harm to others, and that he shouldn't be allowed to speak. Right? They would say, well, Ben Shapiro uses hate speech all the time. The protesters who protest outside his events say that one, and of course that's complete nonsense, by the way. Ben Shapiro has never said anything hateful. He's never said anything derogatory about any kind of groups of people. Happens to him all the time, right? But he doesn't do that to anybody. And of course, the people who make these kinds of claims haven't listened to a single word Ben has ever said, right? They don't attend these events, right? They don't wait in line and try to ask him an intelligent question. They don't watch even any of his videos online, right? But the point is that there is no such thing as a legal category of hate speech to which we can organize phrases into, right? The very fact that we would disagree on say things like what Ben Shapiro says, which obviously aren't hateful, but other people are saying, well, no, that this causes harm to certain minorities. Right? The fact that we would have such a fundamental disagreement is exactly why the government shouldn't have the power to define what constitutes as hate and what doesn't. Right? There is no legally defined category as hate speech. It's just an arbitrary category that the political left defines at their whim to use as a weapon against those who disagree with them. Right? And this brings me to my overall point, or a question that I've always asked, which is why would those on the radical left, and I'm deliberately saying radical left to distinguish them from reasonable liberals, right? I'm not trying to paint everybody, say, who's a liberal, like Dave Rubin. He's a classical liberal. I would consider myself, I guess, in a broader theological sense, a classical liberal, although I do tend to line up conservative on most issues. But I'm getting off onto a rabbit trail. Why would people on the radical left advocate for laws that could be just used by radicals on the right to silence them? Why would the journalist who came to my school advocate for laws that could be used to jail him for doing his job? Right? As Jordan Peterson points out in the same video that's in the description, like, of all people who shouldn't advocate for hate speech laws, right? Except for comedians, obviously, who are number one. But journalists are the last people who should be advocating for hate speech laws. Right? They're the last people who should be advocating against free speech, which is the foundation of their entire career. By the way, Jordan Peterson also said in that video that there's a military saying that goes something along the lines of, any weapon you develop can be used or will be used by your enemy against you in 15 years. Right? And in that same video, Rubin and Peterson, they throw out a couple of possibilities. Rubin says it might just be an extremely short-sighted power grab by the left. Peterson says, the left may be so desperate for putting these laws in place and getting this power that they don't care about the long-term consequences. But I want to suggest a different answer, and this is something I learned from listening to Andrew Klavan's show on the Daily Wire. Right? And keep in mind, this is the very reason our country was founded on freedom of speech. Right? If you allow for truthful speech, this is what Andrew was talking about, and untruthful speech, right? You allow for all speech, all different opinions in the social sphere, I guess you could say. Over time, truthful speech will always win, right? That doesn't mean there won't be short-term victories for those who lie, because they can manipulate and things. But history, especially in the United States, has shown that those who speak the truth win in the end, right? Truth has a way of just defeating lies and crushing lies. And the point is if you're on the side of truth, and I'm not talking about your truth, I'm not talking about my truth, I'm talking about the truth. If you're on the side of the truth will conquer lies. And Andrew Klavan pointed out that the entire radical leftist platform is built on lies, right? Lies about morality, lies about, even religion, lies about sex and gender and all these things. Their entire platform is built on lies. And when your worldview is built on lies, the only way you can win is to silence those speaking the truth. Right? When your political agenda is contingent upon you getting others to believe your lies, you have to silence those speaking the truth. And so that's why the left wants these laws. Right? Because if everybody's left to freedom, the truth will destroy their worldview and their political agenda. And keep in mind, this is why they aren't afraid of these laws being used against them. So why aren't they afraid of these laws being used against them? Well, here's the better question. When was the last time you heard a mainstream conservative advocate for hate speech laws? Right? And I'm not talking about an alt-right troll you could find on Twitter. I'm talking about mainstream conservatives, like the guys I mentioned, Dave Rubin. Sorry, he's a classical liberal. But, even then, and anybody, say, right of the radical left, right? Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, mainstream conservatives like Andrew Klavan, Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Stephen Crowder, Dinesh D'Souza, Frank Turek, who I had on the show the other day. And for that matter, even, I would say, most people on the GOP platform. When was the last time you heard any of them advocate for any kind of hate speech laws or limitations on speech? Now, I know everybody would flock to Trump, right, what he said about the media, but has he actually taken any action to silence them? No. And Trump is far from a typical Republican anyway. I don't even think he would count. I'm more thinking of guys along the lines of Ted Cruz and other people like him. When's the last time any of them advocated for hate speech laws? Well, they don't want hate speech laws because they believe in speaking the truth and that the truth will win, and they understand the danger of handing that kind of power over to the government. Right? Again, you might be able to find a fringe minority on the right who would use these laws to their advantage, but keep in mind we're talking about a majority on the left. We're talking about a majority of the people on the national DNC platform who want these laws. And that majority is not afraid of the minority on the right because it's the left who has the power in media, in academia, in Hollywood to enforce such a worldview on the rest of us. And that's why they're not afraid of these laws being used against them, right? Because they have the social power to enforce it. They're not afraid of these radical right-wingers on the alt-right are going to rise and just take over the media and Hollywood and academia and be able to enforce limitations of speech on the radical left. It's not going to happen, right? So their entire agenda is built on you believing the lies that they put out there, and when your agenda is contingent upon that, you have to silence those speaking the truth because the truth will defeat you ultimately. That's just reality. So again, that's just my take on it, right? That's just my kind of 3,000-foot view, my philosophical take on all these different things going on. But I would highly suggest you go check out the sources in the description. Steven Crowder articulates this far better than I do. I would highly encourage you check out all the pieces and all the kind of details that go into this. But before you do, please like this video, share it with your friends. Most importantly, subscribe and let me know in the comments what topics you'd like me to cover in the future and what guests you'd like me to have on the show. I just had Frank Turek on, but let me know who you'd like me to have on the show. I'd like to have some political people as well, like Ben Shapiro or Dinesh D'Souza, or especially Andrew Klavan. Let me know what you'd like to see on the show, because the show is for you guys. But one rule about my comment section: no hate speech allowed.